Psalm 77 this morning. Psalm 77. Hopefully, Nick, if you'll remind me at the end to introduce some of our missionaries that are here today. I know we have some cards to read and different things, but we want to get on with things this morning. Have a baby shower this afternoon for Miss Jessica Gerald. This is our youth pastor, Jacob's wife, and so make sure that you participate in that, ladies especially, and this is one of our staff members, and they work extremely hard. And so please support them in that. That's 4:30 to 5:30 today in Mills Hall. Psalm 77. I think of all the characters in the Bible, there are a few that I can kind of relate to. And while I don't preach on him a lot, because there's not necessarily a ton of things on the life of Asaph, this is one individual that I somewhat, for some reason, have a little bit of a connection with. Asaph was the music director, as how you would know it nowadays, or what, kind of a modern term would be a worship leader. And let me just say this, I'm not offending or criticizing anybody else, but the worship leader of a church should be the pastor. That, according to the Bible, is the worship leader. There are those that directed music, and it would be like a person that comes up and opens up in prayer in the service. It would be like saying they're the prayer leader. They're just praying during the service. And a music director, they're just leading the singing, and they're doing those things. They're leading in that. But a worship leader is really the pastor. And because worship is more than just singing. Worship is even the offering that I will not forget today. Because folks are good to remind me. I actually had a good comment. I don't remember who said it. One of our members said they were talking to somebody that was visiting, and they said, I really like that church. The pastor even forgets sometimes to take the offering. Usually when we go to churches, that's the biggest priority on their mind, and this pastor forgets about it. And it's always a huge priority Monday morning, I promise you. But see if we're going to be able to pay the bills this week. But Asaph is that individual. He was the music director for David, basically. And Asaph, many of the Psalms, obviously, that we have, they were written by different people. Asaph wrote some Psalms. David wrote some Psalms. Other people wrote some Psalms. And Asaph would lead these Psalms to music. And he was kind of like, you would call it, a choir director. He was in ministry, but he wasn't really the pastor or even the preacher. I'm sure he did speak at different things and teach maybe, but he wasn't really the pastor. He was the music director. Somebody told me years ago, and I have found it to be true, that sometimes creative people, those that tend to be creative, a lot of times people that are musical are creative. A lot of times people that are artistic, obviously, are creative in different things. But many times creative people can deal a lot with melancholy. They can deal a lot with depression. They can deal a lot with deep thinking. And there's a constant inward turmoil with creative people. And if you don't believe that, look at some of our modern art. There is some conflict somewhere. I'm going to tell you that right now. But I have found that to be true, and I hate to even call yourself creative, but I'm musical, and I like to create. I like things. I like different things, and I understand exactly how that goes. And Asaph was this way. And in Psalm 77, I have preached quite a bit out of Psalm 77 over the years. I've not really preached a lot out of Psalm 77 since I've been the pastor here. But I want to deal with this today, and on this subject, mirror, mirror on the wall. And if I could put it into concise terms, what I want to speak to you specifically about this morning is how you and I have to be very careful how we talk to ourselves in times of trouble. This is where, now hold on, this is where so many people get off track in their life because they said the wrong things to themselves in times of trouble. Now, please, we're going to read the whole chapter. It's just 20 verses, 20 verses. But I want you just to really think and give me a few minutes of your time this morning. Look, if you would, at verse 1. To the chief musician, to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and He gave ear unto me. What is interesting in the first verse? We're told about the conflict, and we're told about the consummation of the chapter. We're kind of told before it begins that this is where I was, and this is what ended up happening, so everything's okay. But let me tell you what went on. You find here that he cried unto God, and he heard me. So we know that God took care of things, and we know right now from the beginning, and it's as if Asaph said, just in case, as I'm telling you what happened to me, in case you would think that maybe God wasn't there for me like He should have been, He was. And He did answer. I'm letting you know that right now in the first verse. Look at verse 2. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. Look at verse 4. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, which is what a melancholy person, oftentimes creative individuals, will do. When they face difficulty in their life, they immediately resort thinking of the past. They'll go through the past. They'll process things that happened before. And a lot of times individuals that are not like that, they'll think that we're just weird. They'll be like, come on, snap out of it. A lot of times people like Asaph and even can sometimes you'll look at us and we're just somewhere else. Just gazing off into the distance. And this is what Asaph's talking about here. Notice, if you would, let's go verse 5. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. Another characteristic, by the way, when you deal with maybe depression or questioning or confusion and creative people, a lot of times it's difficult to sleep. He said, I call to remembrance my song in the night. I notice this most important key phrase in the whole chapter. I commune with mine own heart. Now, can I put that in terms that you and I will understand? He's talking to himself. I communed. I'm having a conversation with my own heart. Have you ever done that? Yes. My sons make fun of me. You've heard this before, because I talk to myself a lot. I'm ashamed to admit that, but I do, because I need somebody that'll understand and care about me. Thus, the phrase, mirror, mirror on the wall. You ever been in a time in your life where it seemed like nobody understood? The only person you really could talk to and found yourself in a position that you were talking to was the mirror. I'll drive in the car sometimes and Daniel will be like, who you talking to, Dad? I'd be like, nothing, I was just, I was snoring. I don't know, I'll have to make up something. Notice, if you would, verse 6, I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Verse 7. Will the Lord cast off forever? In other words, he said, I'm spending time, I'm thinking, I'm contemplating, I'm going over the past, I'm thinking of all these things. This problem in my life right now has brought all this on. And he said, my spirit made diligent search. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But what he's saying is this: I just really began to search everything I've been taught, everything I've heard, everything I've read. I searched through all that. And these are some questions he came up with. Look at verse 7. Will the Lord cast off forever? Will He be favorable no more? Is His mercy clean gone forever? Doth His promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath He in anger shut up His tender mercies? Selah. Wow, he is searching. He's asking, by the way, a lot of questions that you and I have asked at different times. Look at verse 10. And I said, this is where everything turns, by the way. And by the way, I believe this chapter is separated in 4 parts. I don't know that. I haven't read that anywhere. It's just through my reading it. That's what I believe. I believe verses 1 through 3 is in a group. I believe verse 4 through 6 is in a group. I believe verse 7 through 9 is in a group. And then the rest of the chapter, verse 10 through 20. Verse 10, and I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work, and talk of thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. By the way, the children of Israel, what we're talking about. The waters saw thee, O God. The waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightning, lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea. Thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. How did that help him? It sure did. But how? What went on? What does this mean? I hope that this will help you this morning, as it has really helped me recently. Lord, we love you, and I ask that you'd bless, Lord, as we talk about the subject of the things we say to ourselves in times of trouble. Lord, it's a very dangerous time. So, Lord, I pray that you would give us wisdom this morning. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Our key verse here in this chapter, and it's not necessarily the key verse of the chapter, but it's the key verse of what I want to speak to you about today, is in verse 6, when David said that he communed with his own heart. Do you know that that is where many people lose their victory? That is where so many people lose their direction. They have an incident, they have difficulty, they have turmoil, they have an infirmity, they have sickness, whatever the case might be. And they find themselves a little bit down, a little bit defeated, and they begin to question things, and they get confused about things. And dear friends, I'm here to tell you, a lot of times, at times like that in my life, there are people who want to help, people want to say, and a lot of times we'll go to others and hear what they have to say. But it really boils down to when we are on our own, and it's just us and God and our own thoughts. What is so important is what we end up saying to ourselves during those times. Because if you're not careful, that old sinful flesh will come out and will lie to you. And so many times when a person went through difficulty, they began to think things and they began to process things, and they literally said the wrong things to themselves. And they got off track, they got out of church, they got away from God, and it all started with themselves. Now, I want you to look at this, and I'm not saying it always happens this way, but I'm saying many of the times this is exactly how this happens. Let's look at the stage of progression in Asaph's life. Number one, as in his incident here, as in most of us, number one, there is the complaining stage. The complaining stage. That's where it all begins. Something happens. Either we were done wrong, either we think we were done wrong, or there's an infirmity, there's a difficulty that has come up in our life. And I look at my wife and my life, and we have numerous infirmities and things that come up just like you do in your life. I would say our biggest is Caden. I'm sure it is. That's the prevalent thing that's just always on our mind. It was on my mind this morning while the choir was singing and different things. That's the things on our mind. But oftentimes, as those things come into your life, there is the complaining stage. Now, we do not know if this was a private problem Asaph was having or if it was a public problem. In other words, we don't know if it's something that was just between him and an individual, or if this was something that involved a group of people. We don't know. We don't know if it was a church problem. We don't know if it was a family problem. We don't know if it was a personal problem. We don't know really what went on in Asaph's life. And I'm kind of glad we don't, because we might tend to say, well, he got victory because he went through this, but I'm going through something different. Dear friend, it doesn't really matter what you're going through. We all seem to go through these stages. First thing is that complaining stage. Now, in the commentary, Matthew Henry said this, and I thought this was really, really good. I just want to read this to you, talking about this specific chapter. Listen to what he says. We have here the portrait of a good man under prevailing melancholy, who has fallen into and is sinking in that horrible pit, that miry clay of depression, and he is struggling to get out. Have you ever been there and you were struggling to get out? Notice what he says, I think, and if I look at verses 1, 2, and 3, look at these things he complained about, and just think about it with me for a minute. Number one, he said this, in the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. Now let me just start right there, and please look at me, get this. Our days of trouble need to be days of prayer. Yes, sir. David said, in my trouble, I complained to everyone else. Asaph didn't say that. Excuse me, I think I just said David. Asaph did not say that. Listen to me. Asaph said this, in the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. Now, what is dangerous is what you're saying to yourself. But I give him credit that he didn't go complaining to everybody else. He closed the door to his house or his room or his closet or whatever it was, and he got down and complained to God. Right. And I recommend you to do that, by the way. Amen. There's enough complaining going on in this world. You're right. And let me let you in on a little bit of a secret. I don't care how they fake it. Your friends don't want to hear it. I hate to ruin your world and bust your bubble. Oh, but I got good friends. Yeah, I know. But after a while, it gets old. Every time they call you, my wife and I were watching, is it wrong to admit you watch TV? I don't know. I guess it's too late now, kind of a thing. If you've been over to my house, you see a TV, so I guess I watch TV. There are I'm sure, some that don't, and I commend you for it. I think it's great. And we obviously try to monitor what we watch, but we watch TV, and there's a show on extreme weight loss. I got some closet dwellers. Now, how many of you honestly can say you've seen that extreme weight loss change? Okay. How many of you need to watch? I'm not going to go there. At least I admit it. I need to watch it, And we're watching this thing, and this lady's going through losing weight, her and her husband, or whatever the case might be, and they're trying to lose weight before they get married, or whatever the case might be, kind of a thing. And we watched that thing for about 30 minutes, and I turned it, because every time that woman talked on that program, she was crying. She was talking, I had a good day yesterday, but I just kind of... And then she's talking to the trainers, and I know, I just been an emotional week, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, man, I can't take it. That's what it's like. And listen to me, a lot of times you and I, we go complain to everybody else. Can I give you a little bit of a ticket here? Go complain to God. Yeah. Amen. He can take it. He knows that's how you're feeling anyway. Yeah. He's not shocked. Just get down in privacy and let it out to God. Our days of trouble should be days of prayer. Look at me. I want you to get this. He also says here that he began to seek. His soul made diligent search. Listen to me. When it feels to you like God has withdrawn from you, that is when you need to find Him. If you feel like God's away from you, or He's a distance away from you, that's not time to go further away. That's time for you to seek Him out. Good stuff. Amen. Amen. Listen to this. Those that are under trouble, you need not think that you can drink it away or laugh it away. You can only pray it away. People find trouble, that's when they turn to the bottle. They'll turn to drugs. They'll turn to medication. They'll turn to things to entertain them, to get their mind off of it. And dear friend, I'm here to tell you, in his day of trouble, he sought the Lord. And let me give you a little bit of a clue like he did in the first verse. It worked. The complaining stage. Notice here what he says here. I thought this was interesting. He said, my soul refused to be comforted. The end of verse 2. What he is saying there is this. My soul refused to be comforted. That means that there were those that had tried to comfort him. There were people in his life, and efforts were made to try to bring comfort to this man that was going through trouble. And he said, literally, my soul refused to be comforted. And dear friend, I'm here to tell you, sometimes in your life you're going to come across people that are going through difficulty, and you're going to try your best to comfort them. And it might even be your own wife and your own husband. And you're going to try to comfort them. But dear friend, when their soul refuses it, you can't do anything about it. It's a process they're going to have to go through with God. You give your best efforts and try and love them, but I'm here to tell you, Asaph said, my soul refused to be comforted. Notice what he says this. He says, I remembered God. This is horrible. Look at verse 3. I remembered God and was troubled. That means that while he was going through this, he said, when I even thought about God and the things of God, it didn't comfort me. It didn't make me feel better. It didn't put me back on top of the mountain. When I thought about God, it troubled me. It bothered me. In other words, he's saying, God, why'd you let this happen? Why would you let this take place? In other words, what he's saying is, when I thought about God, all I thought about was the judgment and all these things of God. And I forgot about the mercy and the grace and all these things. And I'm here to tell you, when you go through trouble, you're going to forget a whole lot of good things about God. And you're going to tend to concentrate on the things you don't like. Yeah. Or the things you and I think's not fair. He said this, I found interesting. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Now listen, what he's saying is this: I complained, and it didn't give me comfort. You know, sometimes you go through something, you just need somebody who's going to go get it out. Somebody says, well, how you doing? You look like something's bothering you. You ever ask somebody that, and boy, you regretted it when you said that? You want to talk about it? And they said, yeah. Oh, that's too bad. Okay, well. You ever had something on you, and buddy, you just found somebody with a listening ear, and buddy, you just let it all out. When you finally got it, it's like, I feel better. Asaph said, I complained, and it didn't make me feel one bit better. The complaining stage. Number 2, you and I normally go through next the contemplation stage. Our complaining, that's our first immediate reaction, and we kind of are mad at this, upset at this, and all this, and then all of a sudden, then we begin to think. Look at verse 4. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. First, there was sleeplessness. Notice that on the screen is your outline if you need it. There was sleeplessness. He said, thou holdest mine eyes waking. Notice second, he said, I am so troubled that I cannot speak. Next, there was silence. He's like, I literally can't sleep, and I can't even talk about it. I don't even know what to say. I can't even put my feelings to words. I'm so confused, and as I'm thinking about why this has happened and how this went down and all these things, there's so many things that don't make sense to me that I can't even talk about it. Notice, if you would, verse 5, he says, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. Third, there was searching. And that's usually what happens to us in this stage. We kind of get where we can't sleep, then we begin to kind of silent. We withdraw, we don't really talk, we don't kind of are distant to people. And then we begin searching. He said, I call to remembrance my song in the night. Remember verse 5, he said, I looked at the days of old. I looked at the ancient times. I began to think back. I began to go through everything that's happened in my life and think, why did this happen? And why am I going through this? And how did this turn out like this? And he said, I got to the point I couldn't sleep and I really couldn't talk about it. All I could do was think. And I began in my mind to search through all the past and all those things. Look at verse 6. He said, I call to remembrance my song in the night. He said, I remember the times that I couldn't sleep before and the difficulties I went through before. And I've rehearsed that I went through in the night, but even that's not helping me right now. He said, I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. And that he's saying, he said, I can't sleep, I can't even talk about it, so now my mind is just going, and I'm trying to process everything, and I'm going over everything in the past, and everything in the present, and even thinking about the future, and I'm trying to make sense of all this. And right here is a dangerous time for you and me. Because notice, next comes the confusion stage. Verse 7 through 9. You and I get confused. Now, what did he get confused about? As his spirit made search, these are the questions that he came up with. In other words, these are the things that were bothering him. Number 1, he said this, will the Lord cast off forever? In other words, is the Lord ever going to come near me again? Is he ever going to help me again? Is he ever even going to be close enough where I could even sense that he's here? Now, maybe I'm talking to people that haven't been through some of these things, but I'm going to tell you, there have been times in my life, it seemed like, man, I did everything I could do. I could not get to the point that I felt like I was close to God.
Right. No, you're right.
I wanted to.
Yes.
I needed it. But I couldn't feel it. Second, he says, will he be favorable no more? In other words, is he not ever going to show favor on my life again? Is that history now? Notice, third, he said, is his mercy clean gone forever? What I find interesting is verse 7, he says, will the Lord cast off forever? Which means, I don't feel like he's here right now, but he used to be. Or he wouldn't have said it that way. Notice second, he says, will he be favorable no more? That means he was at one time. So Asaph is admitting that God was close to me and he did show favor to me and he did show me mercy in verse 8. But he's saying, is it gone now forever? Because I can't find it. I can't find his favor in this situation. I can't seem to find his mercy in this situation. I can't even find him in this situation. Notice the fourth question. Doth his promise fail forevermore? He said, I'm going through all the promises that I've ever been told and I don't see where God's keeping any of his promises in my life right now. Notice what he says next. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? In other words, I can't see the grace of God. I can't see the graciousness of God in any of this. Have you ever had something in your life where you're like, man, I know God, I know you're gracious, but I don't see it in this. I'm going to be honest with you. And I try sometimes because people don't come here to hear my life story and about our youngin'. But all I can do is relate the God's Word to me in my life, because I'll use me as an illustration, because I won't be offended. If I use one of you, it might hurt your feelings, because I know what some of you have been through. But I'm going to tell you something. The first open heart surgery Caden had, and we walked in to see him, and his chest is still open, and he's puffed up like a balloon, and here he is 3 days old. I'm going to be honest with you, I did not see a whole lot of God's graciousness in that. Notice what he asked last. Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? In other words, is he just going to be angry at me the rest of my life? Because obviously he must be angry at me for this to happen in my life. And he says Selah. And this is obviously the second time this has been used. And that's why it's a natural outline in this passage. First, there is the complaining stage. And he says Selah. Think about that. Then he comes to the confusion. And that contemplation turns into confusion. And then he says Selah again. Really think about this. The confusion stage. This is when the questions come. This is when we begin to doubt what we once were certain of.
We're right. Yes, sir.
Satan will make sure to put questions in your mind, by the way, during this stage. Listen to me. If Satan can make you doubt one thing about God, he can make you doubt anything about God.
Oh, you're right. Yes, sir.
If Satan can get you to question God's Word, then Satan can get you to question God Himself. The confusion stage. I can't tell you how many times that you counsel and you talk with people that are going through admittedly very horrible things, and it doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem right. And I can't tell you how many times you get to that stage and they're so confused and they're questioning everything they've been taught. And we have folks leaving their faith left and right. Why? Because God failed them? No, but because they were convinced God failed them. Some of you are looking at me this morning. There have been times where you were convinced, and you might even almost be there right now, that God has failed you in some way. The confusion stage. And it is so dangerous what you say to yourself during this time. I want you to notice fourth, the choice stage. Now, this is important. Every one of us come to this. When you have a difficulty, when you have turmoil, when you have an infirmity, when you have trouble, whatever the case might be, it always starts with complaining, then it starts with contemplating. You begin to think about things, and then you begin to get confused. Then you question and all these things. And we all kind of get to this point, but look at me, dear friends. This is the choice stage. Now you have to decide how you are going to go forward from here. You now have questions, all these things you've been taught, that God's great and God's good and God's gracious, all these things. You've questioned all these things. And now there are some people I've talked to, they even question whether God's real or not. They don't even know. And you get to this point. Now, right here is where you make a choice. You decide right now which direction you are going to go. Now, notice this, the choice stage. Look at verse 10. This is what Asaph says. And I said. It all breaks right there. In other words, Asaph said, I've done my thinking now, and I've done my complaining, and I've had my confusion, and I've asked my questions. Now I've got to make a decision. And I said, notice what he did. This is my infirmity. Now there's three things that Asaph did that he determined to do that brought him out of this. Number one, Asaph said, I will submit. Notice what he says. First, I said. That's personal. That means nobody else can make this decision for me. Nobody else can talk me into this. By the way, remember, he said, my soul refused to be comforted. There are those that had tried to help him, and he refused to help. And it comes down, dear friend, nobody else can make this decision. People can't love you out of this decision. It's a decision you have to make yourself. I said. He is literally saying, I'm communing with my own heart. I said to myself, this is my infirmity. I love that. When he said, this is my infirmity, it made it personal. It made it intimate. He is saying this is my infirmity. It belongs to me. And I cannot blame anyone else for it. Now listen to this verse. Psalm 37 verse 23. Listen to me. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delighteth in His way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with His hand. Say, preacher, what are you saying? What are you saying, preacher? He said this. I said this is my infirmity. This is where most people go the wrong direction. What you say to yourself in times of infirmity and trouble are so important. He said this is my infirmity. He takes ownership. He doesn't blame anybody else. And by the way, He doesn't gather in a whole bunch of other people to tell His side to.
Right. Amen.
Look at me, dear friend. When you go through something, it isn't everybody else's infirmity. It's your infirmity. Don't go gathering them in and turning them against other people and trying to get them on your side to make you feel better. This is your infirmity. You do business with God and no one else. You said that doesn't mean you don't ask people to pray for you and help you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, you know what our tendency is? We try to go to everybody else and gather everybody else around us instead of going to God. He said, this is my infirmity. It's my responsibility. I'm the one that has to make the decisions to get myself out of the place where I am right now. I want you to notice He said, I will submit. I will submit. That's the point. This is my infirmity. Dear friend, look at me this morning. My time's almost done, but I want you to get this. Every one of us, when we come at times like this in our life, we have to submit to God.
Yes, you're right. Amen.
This is an infirmity that God's brought into my life, and I don't understand it. But it's my infirmity. We have to submit.
Amen.
The more we rebel and buck against it because we don't like it, and none of us like it. But Asaph got to the point, I am going to submit. This is my infirmity. Second thing he did. He said, I will submit. Second thing he chose to do, he said, I will remember. Look at verse 10. I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. He says, I will remember. Now, this is the second of three things that Asaph said. Number one, he said, I'm going to submit. That's how I'm going to get out of this. Number two, I'm going to remember some things. Now, what was he going to remember? Notice this. He says, I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. First, he says this, I'm going to remember thy will. In other words, what he is saying is that, you know what, I remember all the years that I have followed you, and God, you have taken care of me. Notice what he says, with thy right hand. That's why Psalm 37:24 says, for the Lord upholdeth me with His hand. You've got to understand that over times in life, as you look back in your life, as Asaph did, there's going to be some things that you don't understand. But as you look back, you realize it was part of God's will, and God had a purpose. He said, I am going to remember thy will. I'll remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. All those years that God guided me with His hand, the Bible says over and over, by the way. I don't have time to give you the verses this morning. But the years of the right hand of the Most High means the years that God had guided him. I will remember thy will. Second, he said, I will remember thy works. Look at verse 11. I will remember the works of the Lord. He said three things I'm going to remember. I'm going to remember God's will. And second, I am going to remember God's works. Now, why did he say it this way? The works of the Lord. What he is talking about here is things that nobody else can take credit for. They're the work of the Lord and nobody else. Look at me. I can't tell you how many times things have happened in my life that I couldn't get credit for. My wife couldn't get credit for. Nobody else could get credit for. It could not be explained. God just did it. It was the work of the Lord. And that's what you need to remember when you go through some of these problems. There has been many times in your life where you can't explain how God fixed that problem. And you don't understand how God ended up mending that heart or turning that situation. All you can say is God did it. I don't know how He did it, but He did it. That is the